Morning, Glory, America. It's Hugh Hewitt. I am back in California, but I cannot come into the studio today. So for the second day in a row, my friend from Texas, I can't even get used to saying that. He used to be my friend from Minnesota cold. Ed Morrissey is relocated from the great North Plain to the great Southern Plain of Texas, is back and sitting in for me for the first 2 hours today before the Hillsdale Dialogue. Ed Morrissey, thank you, my friend.
Good morning. Thank you, Hugh Hewitt. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh today from the ReliefFactor.com studios in the great Southern Plain of Texas, right here outside the Alamo. Not actually really outside the Alamo, but if you're watching on the universe, HUGHNIVERSE.com, you would see me parked in front of a brilliant picture of the Alamo. That's me celebrating my Texas culture. Not too far from the border, actually, and that is our first topic today because I'm actually very pleased to tell you this morning. If you've just woken up, you may not even realize this, but Joe Biden actually has a plan to deal with the border crisis. Dwayne, did you know that Joe Biden actually has a plan to deal with the border crisis?
He has a plan.
He has a plan. It's 9 months in office. He's finally formulated a plan, according to CNN and Reuters this morning.
Okay, so let's go back and review the record because the last administration had a plan.
Yes, they did. It had a plan.
And the first day in office, this administration didn't like that plan. So
it was inhumane. It was inhumane. It was cruel. So Donald Trump's plan to secure the border was inhumane and cruel, and Joe Biden insisted that it had to be changed on day one of his presidency.
Not just changed, but eliminated.
Completely eliminated.
So by the stroke of an executive order, he decided to drop it, and it got challenged in court. And the Biden administration fought it in court, saying, we can do this. And the court said, no. The Trump administration actually signed an actual document. It wasn't an executive order. It was an actual thing that he did. You can't just do away with the stroke of a pen. And so the court tried to reinstate it, and this administration said, well, we're going to do a workaround. We're going to find some way to make this thing go away. So I know it's not that. Wait.
Well, Dwayne, I'm telling you that that's exactly what it is. According to CNN, according to Reuters, I'll just read you right off of CNN's report from this morning. Just before we went on the air, I found this. They were tweeting it out just before we went on the air. The Biden administration is preparing to revive in mid-November a Trump-era border policy that forces migrants to stay in Mexico until their U.S. immigration court date, according to administration officials putting it on track to implement another controversial policy at the U.S. southern border. So in other words, Joe Biden has a plan. It's Donald Trump's.
And it's now humane after they had 100,000 migrants come into the country.
I love it when a plan comes together.
I do too.
Once we had the requisite amount of people come into the country illegally, now it becomes humane to.
Well, there's more to this, of course, Dwayne. And, we're having a little bit of fun with this, but there's a little more to this.
With this administration, there always is.
There always is. Now, as Dwayne was telling us, the administration is being forced to re-adopt the Remain in Mexico policy. The federal judge in August ruled that their policy change had violated the Administrative Procedure Act, which usually catches most presidents by surprise, that you actually have to have a process to change policies, and EOs alone don't do it. And so they were forced to readopt this anyway. They've been appealing it ever since. The Supreme Court finally refused to hear an appeal on this, and now they're stuck with Remain in Mexico policy. So in part, that's what this is. However, when you read the CNN report on this, it actually sounds that they're going to actually change their policy back to Remain in Mexico. If you go to Reuters, it sounds a little different at Reuters. This is how Reuters reports it. They're taking steps to restart by mid-November a program begun under his predecessor, Donald Trump, that forced asylum seekers to wait in Mexico for U.S. court hearings after a federal court deemed the termination of the program unjustified, U.S. officials said Thursday. The administration, however, is planning to make another attempt to rescind the Migrant Protection Protocols, MPP, commonly called the Remain in Mexico policy, even as it takes steps to comply with the August ruling. So, Dwayne, what the actual plan is to implement Remain in Mexico while trying to stop the implementation of Remain in Mexico, which is also very much like this Biden administration. They're going in two opposite directions at the same time.
He's going full John Kerry. I actually voted for the $87 billion before I voted against it. Right. I mean, this is in league with what we saw at the Supreme Court this week.
Amy Coney Barrett's comment to the Solicitor General about the death penalty case with Tsarnaev. Yeah.
You know, the Biden administration campaigned, has implemented policy at the DOJ level. They are trying to end capital punishment. They do not want any more federal executions. He ran on it.
This was on his issues page that he was running on the idea of eliminating the death penalty. He just wants Congress to do it, which is, you know, clearly how it should be worked anyway. I mean, constitutionally, it's Congress that has to pass that. However, let's not forget that the president has plenary commutation powers, and he could simply commute everybody's death sentence on federal death row to life without parole.
Right. So he doesn't
want to do that, though. He doesn't want to do that because
it would create a
risk of it.
Right, political headaches it would cause. So you have the Tsarnaev case where a jury of his peers in Massachusetts gave him the death penalty for basically bombing the Boston Marathon.
For radical Islamist terrorism.
Correct.
Yes.
It got appealed, and his death penalty got overturned at the appellate court level.
For a couple of technical reasons, not to say that they aren't substantive too, but I mean there was issue of voir dire, whether or not that they voir dired effectively on pretrial publicity, which is that's a real issue.
It's a legal motion. It's now being appealed back to the Supreme Court to reinstate the Department of Justice, who again wants to ban all federal executions, is now appealing to the Supreme Court, heard by the 9 this week, to reinstate the death penalty on Tsarnaev. Amy Coney Barrett is looking at the Solicitor General and saying, okay, Sparky, can you explain to me why you want to restore the death penalty on this guy and then turn around and ban all federal executions? Why are you here exactly?
What's the point of this? It's a
mixed
theater.
signal. It's a mixed message.
It's not even a mixed message. Political theater.
Nobody knows what this administration truly wants.
Joe Biden wants to eat his cake and have it too. On the death penalty and on being a tough guy on terrorism while getting rid of the death penalty. That's Joe Biden's play there. And the same thing is true here, by the way. And here's what the actual play is here. They want to be seen as complying with the court's order. So they're going to go ahead and reinstate this Remain in Mexico policy. The target date for the re-implementation of this, according to CNN and according to Reuters, is mid-November, so it's a month off. Now, why would it take a month to restore this policy when the court ordered it back in August? Well, the reason why is that the Biden administration, this is more evident in the Reuters report than it is in the CNN report, they're going to go back to the Remain in Mexico policy conditionally. And the condition is that Mexico agrees to do this. And Mexico is not going to agree to do this. If you remember what the sequence was when Donald Trump created the Remain in Mexico policy, he put a great deal of economic pressure on Mexico to comply with this.
Right? He
strong-armed them. Yeah, he threatened a trade war with Mexico. He threatened to blockade the trade border with Mexico, and Mexico finally agreed to the Remain in Mexico policy as a trade-off against the trade war. I mean, I remember when people were talking about this as a trade war. So they were never happy about the Remain in Mexico policy, and as long as Donald Trump was in office, though, they understood that they were going to have to keep it. Now Joe Biden is saying, well, it's going to be dependent on whether or not Mexico agrees to do with this because, and this is actually fairly clever, the federal court can't order Mexico to do it.
Right. So Biden is going to be mealy-mouthed about the whole thing, and then go to Mexico and say, hey, Can we go back to the deal you had with Trump? And Mexico's to say pound sand. As soon as Mexico says that, then Biden go back to the court. Well, we tried.
Shucks.
It's not our fault. We did our best.
It's not our fault. I'm sorry. So, yeah, I mean, at least it's a plan. It's the first, somewhat strategic plan we've seen from
it's a
Joe Biden
plan.
on the border.
What it is it's planned fecklessness.
Yeah, but it's planned. That's still an improvement.
Planned
it's
fecklessness.
planned.
Instead of unintended fecklessness, it's planned fecklessness.
It's planned fecklessness. At least it's an improvement. I'm Ed Morrissey, filling in for Hugh Hewitt. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt today, where we go from passing the popcorn to passing the popcorn, right over to Sonny Bunch of The Bulwark, at Sonny Bunch on Twitter. Sonny, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Ed. How's it going?
It's going great. It's going great. I understand that you've seen a couple of movies that are actually on my list. No Time to Die, the latest Bond film, and The Last Duel, which I only have seen brief clips of, and it looks really fascinating. Of course, a Ridley Scott film usually is pretty fascinating anyway. So let's start with The Last Duel, because this is I want to get more into Bond, because I want to get into the whole which Bond is best debate, which seems to be like an ongoing. It's the evergreen debate in Hollywood lore. But let's start with The Last Duel.
Sure.
What were your impressions there?
Sure. So The Last Duel is an interesting movie. It has been pitched in the trailers as a very serious examination of essentially a medieval Me Too, right? It is essentially a woman who is played by Jodie Comer says that she has been raped by a French noble played by Adam Driver, and her husband, played by Matt Damon, demands satisfaction. And it gets into all sorts of court intrigue between these three, plus Ben Affleck, who plays a kind of mid-tier lord, not the king, but the next step down, regent or some such, whatever. I don't know exactly how the French do it over there. It's
I think
tricky.
He's a count, right? He's a count in this.
Viscount or some such. So anyway, the story is told in a sort of Rashomon style, right? It is told from the perspective of first Matt Damon's character, who is off fighting wars and learns of this horrible crime that's been committed against his wife. Then from Adam Driver's perspective, as the person who is accused of the crime, we see the act from his POV. And then from the wife's perspective, we get what the film describes as the truth. And it's interestingly done. The script is by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck. It's their first time writing a script together since Good Will Hunting. And again, the way this movie has been pitched to people is kind of very serious, very dramatic, kind of Ridley Scott historical epic. But what's interesting about the movie, as I was actually watching it, is that it's weirdly funny. It's almost there. The every time Ben Affleck in particular is on the screen, it has an almost frat comic style to it. There's a very weird undercurrent to the whole thing that is deeply amusing. I don't know exactly what to make of it in terms of what Damon and Affleck and Ridley Scott are trying to say about all this, but it is certainly it was not exactly what I was expecting. I was expecting something a bit more dour than this turned out to be. It's good. It's interesting, and I am always a huge fan of Ridley Scott, and when he's working in historical epic mode, from Gladiator to Kingdom of Heaven, the director's cut is a little underrated still, I think. And the only one that it was a real miss for me is Robin Hood, the Robin Crow or Russell Crowe Robin Hood, but this is good. It's entertaining. It's big historical epic. Again, it's kind of surprisingly funny. It's weirdly anachronistic in certain ways. I mean, like Matt Damon's, mid-tier noble talks about going broke, and then when the crime is being discussed, I believe the phrase that Ben Affleck uses is deny, deny, deny. which is like, okay, this feels very 1990s all over again. But it was, but it's good. It's entertaining. I recommend it if you're looking for something to check out this week and you've already seen the new James Bond.
So, a couple things on this. First off, Ben Affleck being involved in this, and to a lesser extent, Matt Damon. I mean, you're right. I think that they're marketing this as sort of a medieval Me Too. Is this a sort of an attempt to make amends for their connections to Harvey Weinstein, just a sort of an artistic representation? That deny thing sounds like almost a direct reference to that. Did you get that sense?
Yes, I mean, there's certainly a case to be made that this is the medieval Me Too, that this is the reckoning that the Golden Boys of Miramax have to have given their longtime relationship with Harvey Weinstein and their denials that they kind of knew anything or had any inkling of what was going on. And I think you can, if you were to make that argument, I think it would be a very, very reasonable one to make. It is, I think, more interesting than just that, but that is certainly an element of it.
Well, I would say that certainly, I mean, that can be part of the context of this. That doesn't mean that you can't enjoy the movie or that the movie itself isn't excellent, right? I mean, it's just an interesting part of the context of this. So, I'm not necessarily a big fan of anachronistic elements being in sweeping historical epics, which is the reason why I approached The Kingdom of Heaven with so much trepidation and was really actually pleasantly surprised by how little of it was actually in there. But the art itself, the art should be able to stand on itself. And if it does in The Last Duel, I'm actually really pleased because it did look interesting. I will say, though, that it sort of reminded me a little bit of Rob Roy in the way it was set up, right? With the setup of the film, the epic battle over the rape of somebody's wife. Rob Roy did that. There's plenty of films that have done similar things. Sure. You can go back to Death Wish and Braveheart for that matter for similar types of structures in these films, and that doesn't make the films bad. It just is. It's a well-known trope.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that this more resembles a legal thriller than a big action movie. The action stuff is almost, with the exception of the titular last duel at the end of the film, the action stuff is fairly perfunctory, mostly just to give us a sense of kind of who these guys are and what sort of violence they are able to commit. So the last scene feels real, feels a little more built in, not just tacked on. So yeah, and there's just a lot of court intrigue and a lot of like political angling, which again is interesting. Maybe it's entirely possible that this is all made up and anachronistic. It's hard to say. I am not an expert in 14th century French legal history. So,
well, this is not a documentary either. It's supposed to be entertaining.
Exactly.
So, all right, speaking of entertaining, Daniel Craig has finally wrapped up his 5-film, I believe, run as James Bond. I have to say that my own particular perspective is that Daniel Craig is now my favorite James Bond. I found the Daniel Craig era films to be sort of more gritty, more realistic, more tied to reality than especially some of the later entries of James Bond. I think Roger Moore is the nadir of James Bond. I think of Daniel Craig now as sort of the quintessential realistic James Bond. How was No Time to Die? And do you agree with my assessment on Daniel Craig?
Yeah, I'm a relatively big fan of these movies. I'm not a huge James Bond guy. I am not a James Bond obsessive. I'm not one of these people who has watched Dr. No 17 times and can tell you, can recite all the lines of every one of the movies. My first Bond, growing up was really Pierce Brosnan. So I don't have like a super strong attachment to the series. I do like the Daniel Craig James Bonds a lot. I have seen them described as the Dark Knight version of the James Bond movies, which say a little more self-serious, a little darker, a little grittier, right? And you can even see the structure of this series in those movies. The Casino Royale is basically Batman Begins. Skyfall is basically Dark Knight, and then this movie, I think you could very easily describe it as a Dark Knight Rises style film. I would say that Daniel Craig is probably my favorite of the James Bonds at this point. I mean, I think it's him and Connery have kind of created the two most iconic versions of this character. I think it is fair to say. Again, I don't have super strong feelings about which is best, just because this is not, it's not my favorite series in the whole world. But there's something to be said for a series of films that's been going on for 60 years now. And I thought No Time to Die was a very good way to wrap up the current cycle, the current version of these films.
We've got about 30 seconds left, Sonny. What do you think happens next with James Bond? Does it become Jane Bond, or what's the next evolution for James Bond? You got about 30 seconds on this.
Yeah, so Barbara Broccoli, who is the producer and the head of Eon, which is the production company that makes the James Bond movies, has said in interviews repeatedly, James Bond is a male character. James Bond will be a man. They're not going to make a Jane Bond. In this film, there is a female 007, but 007 is a distinction, given by MI6. It's not, It's not the character of James Bond. So, I think they'll probably have, a male James Bond. I don't think they're going with Jane Bond anytime soon.
All right, Sonny Bunch from The Bulwark, thank you so much. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh today, and it's Friday, which means that the weekend's coming up and college football is coming up. Here to talk to us about the status of the top 25 and the upcoming choices for the college playoffs is Doug Lesmerises, sports writer, podcaster for Cleveland.com at Doug Lesmerises. Doug, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me back. Good to see you, Ed.
So, I'm not Hugh Hewitt, so I'm not going to obsess over the Ohio State University's position here. But they're definitely part of the mix. I saw, I got your podcast. I didn't realize, because I wasn't watching last weekend, that Texas A&M upset Alabama. What does this do to the playoff picture now?
Well, everybody in the world thought the two best teams in the country were clearly Georgia and Alabama, two teams in the same conference in the SEC. Only 4 teams make the playoff. We thought 2 were going to be from the SEC no matter what. This maybe changes that. Alabama's still the favorite to get to the SEC championship game against Georgia, but Alabama has lost all of its wiggle room. Plus, it's just a huge upset. Alabama never loses. Somebody found a way to beat Nick Saban in the regular season. That alone is a mini miracle.
So, I mean, they got to get past Georgia now just to even get into the playoffs. Georgia is undefeated at the moment. Am I correct about that?
I think we are at the point now, Ed, where everybody agrees Georgia is number 1, and then we don't know. So, Georgia this week, there's only 13 undefeated teams left in college football, 8 of them among the Power 5 conferences. So really only 8 big dogs left. Georgia plays one of them this week. Georgia and Kentucky both undefeated. Kentucky a nice underdog story. So Georgia's got to be careful, but Georgia looks like the absolute best team, no doubt about it.
So you mentioned in your podcast that there's one team that has kind of come into contention. It's sort of a surprise team that's come into contention. Is that Kentucky, or are you looking at a different team?
No, it's the idea that Kentucky has gone this far. Kentucky beat Florida. Kentucky beat LSU. They're in the mix, but right down the road from them, the Cincinnati Bearcats, the fact that they are in this position, they're not in one of the Power 5 conferences. They're a real underdog story. They've beaten Indiana and Notre Dame. They look like they certainly could go 13-0. And if they do, I think they'll almost, well, not certainly make the playoff, have a really good case for it. So Cincinnati, that's never happened. Nobody in their conference has made the playoff, and that's what we're watching the rest of this second half of the season.
We are speaking with Doug Lesmerises and talking about the college football playoffs here. I got to sneak in one for my team, though, Doug. You just mentioned them, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. This is my team. This is the Heartbreak Squad. Every time they get into the playoffs, they find a way to make me wonder why they were in there in the first place. And they do have the one loss. Do they have a shot at the playoffs? Are they, I mean, on the strength of schedule, do they have a case for getting into the playoffs, even if they win all the way out?
Yeah, it's probably tough. They still have a couple good games left. They got USC still left on the schedule, but that Cincinnati game was really big for them, too. The thing for Notre Dame is trying to figure out who the best quarterback is. We've seen a lot of teams this year play its backup quarterback. Notre Dame's played 3, and Drew Pine, the guy who's kind of like third quarterback, might be the best quarterback. So sometimes that can be a hard thing to figure out. I don't think it's going to be Notre Dame's year. I think they've probably already suffered the loss they can't have. But you know what? They could still have a very good season. Stay optimistic.
Yeah, it's for Notre Dame fans, that's always like, well, you had a good season, you got into a bowl game. Yeah. It's like, damning with faint praise sort of situation, because the expectation is, unrealistic as it is that Notre Dame's going to compete for that title every single year. And so and again, I mean, we get back to the Ohio State University. I got to throw this in there, I guess, because this is Hugh's show. It's not my show. Where is Ohio State coming in now?
So Ohio State is off this week. They get their little break, but they lost in week 2 to Oregon, and it looks like they can get over that loss. The hard thing, as you know,
right.
Notre Dame, when you're not in a conference, you can't win a conference championship. The Big Ten looks really good this year. So Ohio State has a tough road, but ultimately it has opportunity. Has to play Michigan State, has to play Penn State, has to play Michigan, and then looking like Iowa in the Big Ten championship game. Those 4 opponents are all in the top 10 in the country. So Ohio State, if you beat those 4, that's a tough road. But if you do it, you're in. So opportunity still ahead for Ohio State.
All right. So I think we've already kind of settled that Georgia and Kentucky are the game to watch. Is the game to watch this weekend? We got about 30 seconds left. What's the other game that we should all be watching this weekend?
It's a little bit of a rougher slate, but Cincinnati, again, they've played their 2 biggest games of the year. They're now in conference play. Everybody in their conference wants to sort of now ruin it for them. UCF, Central Florida, a couple of years ago went undefeated and claimed kind of its own national title, even though nobody else gave them a national title. So I think Central Florida is maybe one of the tougher remaining games for Cincinnati. Cincinnati can't let down. Keep half an eye on that.
There you go. All right, so those are the 2 games that we're going to be watching. Doug Lesmerises is going to be able to analyze this next week for you after all these games are done. Thank you very much, Doug, for being with us. When we come back, a lot more news to discuss. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh. We'll be right back. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com in the ReliefFactor.com studios. We're at the end of another week. So many stories to talk about. Tarzana Joe, the poet laureate of the Hugh Hewitt Show, joins us now. Tarzana Joe, what is the poem of the week this week?
Well, Ed, when I first became a guest on the Hugh Hewitt Show, it was because you declared, and I'm going to paraphrase because I don't have my notes from 20 years ago. He said he would go insane if he did politics 15 hours a week on the radio, and he had to have a break, some Shakespeare, some fiction, some nonfiction, some poetry, and I'm kind of feeling the same way today.
Good.
I need a break from politics, a long-delayed vacation, some hours without worry to begin rejuvenation. But when I try to book a flight to wander in some heather, I'm told there's nothing flying. I guess it's just the weather. Perhaps I'll take a restful drive, but fuel costs more than vino, and with the gas that's in my car, I'll barely make Encino. I'll start my Christmas shopping, be one of Santa's elves, but when I get to Toys Were Us, there's nothing on the shelves. I'll do some volunteering. I'll join the PTA. I'm sure the boards would love to hear the things I've got to say. I'll watch some college football, or maybe watch the pros. It's just a game, thank goodness. There's no politics in those. I'll stream some entertainment and hear a comic joke. It's just for laughs, and no one cares if comedy is woke. It is as if the universe is trying to remind us there's no place where we're breathing that politics won't find us. So don't sit on the sidelines and never be deterred. Now is the time for all good friends to have your voices heard. That's No Break from Politics, Sorry, by Tarzana Joe.
I don't think. I think that's one of those sorry, no sorry types of things. And by the way, you can. It's brilliant. I'm trying not to laugh, especially the Encino remark. The Encino thing is brilliant.
The point is, you're supposed to laugh. It's my success on the radio is measured by the guffaws I hear as I'm being guffawed from you or from Ed or from whoever is in the wonderful chair. Sometimes I even get a laugh from the producer, but I guess he wasn't listening today. I don't know.
Oh, I think he's listening very intently. And by the way, there are no supply chain issues at TarzanaJoe.com. So if you need a poem written specifically for some occasion, or just because you really like to have a poem written, go to TarzanaJoe.com. You can actually
he will work 24/7.
He will work 24/7.
I work better at night. I'm told I work better at night, too.
Truckers are standing by, right, Tarzana Joe?
Yes.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. You know, I mean, there is no escape from politics. I love this poem. There's no escape from politics. There's no way you can get away from this. And in part, that's on all of us, I think. But it's always great to have a laugh at that. And look, I mean, I think that this is an absolutely brilliant segment. And you're right. And Hugh is right. You need to have some sort of differentiation here, and this is. I'm sure that you've enjoyed this so much as much as we've enjoyed having that.
Thank you. It's been a special part of my life. Certainly not as special as my wonderful golf game but anything in my great family. But it is a special part of my life to be with you and Hugh on the Hugh Hewitt Show.
So again, go to TarzanaJoe.com, at TarzanaJoe, by the way, on Twitter. If you want your own poem, if you want to commission a poem from Tarzana Joe, TarzanaJoe.com is where you go. And Tarzana Joe, thank you so much for being with us today. Great to have you with us as always.
Thanks, Ed.
Welcome back. This is Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com, filling in for Hugh Hewitt from the ReliefFactor.com studios here in Texas. Joining us now is Heather Long, Washington Post economics correspondent and proud Pennsylvanian, who's been doing some very good reporting on inflation and especially breaking down the components of inflation. Heather, welcome to the show.
Hi, Ed. Thanks for having me.
I've really been appreciating your drilling down on the inflation story. Earlier this week, you were talking about some of the components of inflation and why that top line number of 5.4% annualized inflation rate coming out of coming out of September, I believe, is somewhat deceptive when you're talking about impact on consumers, probably especially more working class consumers and those on fixed incomes.
Yeah, that's right. Obviously, highest rate in 13 years. So these are pretty big numbers that are very uncomfortable for a lot of Americans, but you really got to the heart of it. This is especially hard for folks who are middle class, working class, and certainly who are lower income in this country, because when you look at what's driving the inflation, it's no longer the used cars and the lumber prices. That was the story from the spring and the summer. Right. Now we're seeing three things really drive inflation. Number one is gas prices. Obviously, a lot of Americans are filling up that tank and seeing that very acutely. Number two is food prices, particularly almost any type of protein. So beef, chicken, fish, and even eggs are up more than 10%. From a year ago. And the last one that I have been warning people about for months now is the rise in rent prices.
Right.
So, great for homeowners who've bought these homes and seen the home prices soar, but we are now seeing rent prices rise at the fastest rate since 2001. And that's likely to continue throughout the rest of the year and into 2022. That's not something that's short-lived or transitory. And I would also note that rent, what really worries me is it's not being driven by New York City and San Francisco this time around. It's being driven by a lot of cities that used to be seen as affordable, places like Boise, Idaho, Phoenix, Arizona, the Atlanta area. And so when you see the prices really shoot up in these places, where are people going to go?
And Heather, the New York Times actually has a big splashy piece on this today on rent inflation. How much of this is driven, do you think, by certainly by the real estate prices, is people have just gotten very restless. I just moved, so I'm part of that. I just moved a few months ago. Sold my house in Minnesota, came to Texas. How much of that is driven by, however, the rent issues, the moratorium, and the increase in costs for just people who buy just to rent, right? I mean, this is people. It's an investment that people make in these properties. How much of that is being driven by the moratorium and the difficulty in dealing with collections?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Ed. I will say it's a little bit hard to know. Obviously, a lot of people predicted there would be a big surge in evictions this fall as that moratorium ended in many parts of the country. So far, we have not seen a huge surge in most places. So it's a little bit hard to know, okay, how much is that landlords wanting, and probably rightfully so, to recoup some of their lost money by raising the rent a bit. I do think of some factors that are overlooked that are driving the rent prices. Number one is people are going back to cities. They are going back to work. And so you see a lot of people who maybe moved in with friends or back in with family, with mom and dad, who are now going back and looking for an apartment again. The other one that's kind of interesting is the demographic situation. Several people have pointed out to me, we've just never seen this many people looking for a rental property. Obviously, you got your 20-year-olds who are looking to get started in a rental property, but you also have a lot of 30-year-olds and even 40-year-olds who can't afford to buy with the high home prices, so they're having to rent still. And then you have this interesting trend of a lot of baby boomers who've been there, done that, raised their kids in those homes, are now trying to sell into this high market and then go back to be renters as well. So that's some of the biggest generations in America are all trying to rent at the same time.
So, to an extent, this part might be temporary. That part of that might be temporary, but you're not going to see a deflation in these prices. This is probably what we're talking about. Is there may be a relaxation in the rate of inflation here, but we're not going to see a deflation in prices.
Yeah, that's exactly right. When you see rent prices go up, they tend not to sink too far unless you're expecting another pandemic-like situation, which I don't think, hopefully doesn't happen. I will say those demographic trends, though, suggest that we could be in for high rent inflation for a while. And I think the reality is, are we going to stick at 5% inflation overall? Probably not. But I keep telling people we are very likely into 2022 and possibly 2023 to be having uncomfortable inflation. What I mean by that is inflation that stays above 3%, maybe even 4%. And that's higher. That's higher than the target we have in the United States of 2% inflation. And for a lot of people, again, we were talking about a lot of working class people are really going to feel that. They are feeling that. People's expectations of where inflation will be for the next 3 years are the highest we've seen in a long time.
Heather Long from the Washington Post. You can find her on Twitter @ByHeatherLong. Coming up next, the Hillsdale Dialogue. I'm Ed Morrissey of HotAir.com from the ReliefFactor.com studios. We'll be right back.